St. Bonaventure University releasing its reopening plan today for the upcoming fall academic school year. Mike, a lot to go through here, but we're going to primarily focus on the students aspect here.
Yeah, Sean, a lot to unpack after today, a busy day here for both of us, scouring through this massive reopening plan, which is going to be coming to your screen here right now, as you see on the screen. The plan for move-in day, obviously, there is a lot for students to be mindful of before then, but for now, obviously school year starting on August 24th, in-person classes. But that is where it stands right now for move-in day. And it says there, first-year students, freshmen, and transfers all kind of moving in August 21st, 22nd, 23rd, kind of on a staggered schedule. And then the same thing for everybody else, all the other returning undergrads, just kind of a staggered schedule there. Then you see those exceptions there, not interesting at all to me, that athletes, RAs, orientation leaders, peer coaches, student workers, early that are all coming back early. No early arrivals will be permitted outside of those listed above. Sean, what do you think of the move-in day? Smart by St. Bonaventure?
Yeah, no, it's staggered. It's everything you would expect at this point. I think the more interesting thing is if we go down a little bit further, the screening and testing that's going to be required of students before they do arrive on campus. And that'll include, in August, students will be in a Zoom session in each grade level. And in that Zoom session, it looks like we're going to discuss roles and responsibilities when we get to campus to ensure that the St. Bonaventure community remains healthy and we don't have any COVID outbreaks. So we'll see in the student pre-arrival requirements that will require both a COVID test and a pre-arrival screening that'll take place 48 hours prior to your arrival on campus. The COVID test, kind of interesting, Mike, and as you know, it will have some big implications for out-of-state students, especially coming from certain locations.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, the move-in schedule to me is good. I think that's a good plan. In years past, I mean, and that's the thing students have to get over, is that this isn't a normal school year. This is going to be strict. This is going to be, these rules are going to be enforced. I know I've heard a few students complain about not being able to move in on that certain day that they're scheduled to move in, but that's a pretty strict, from my understanding, that's a pretty strict, you have to move in on this day. There's no exceptions. Pretty smooth schedule. But yeah, as you mentioned, that Zoom meeting that every student will have to be a part of, that's outlined on the screen right now, those 10 bullet points there. And even more importantly, those pre-screening, pre-arrival screenings, the testing. Actually, one of my biggest questions before this was released today was, what about the testing, the 14-day rule there? They said it has to be within 14 days. I kind of figured, well, what if I get the test outside of 14 days, results come within the 14-day period? But from my understanding, that test has to be, actually, the date of the test has to be within 14 days. And yeah, to your point, with the out-of-state students today, it appears, at least for now, that students from those states in the New York State quarantine list, including myself from Wisconsin, will have to follow that quarantine. Actually, before this podcast, I forgot to tell you about this before coming on, Tom Missel, Chief Communications Officer from SBU, emailed me to tell me that the university is trying to work with the state to maybe get around that quarantine. If students are getting tested for the virus before showing up to campus, if a negative test and being asymptomatic is a requirement, then maybe that would negate the quarantine. But for now, yeah, look, it appears that students from those states, and I think there's probably more than 50 students from those states. I believe later on in this document, Sean, it says that students might have to find their own way. They maybe have to pay for their own way to quarantine at a hotel. For me, I'm trying to get permission from my landlord to move in a couple of weeks early. But that's also another thing that students.
Yeah, in regard to the COVID-19 testing, though, another interesting point is they want the test to be performed no more than 14 days arriving at campus. But some issues some students might come across is what if you say you get your test 6 days before campus and it takes 6 to 7 days to arrive? How are you going to be able to provide the information to Bonaventure in time to move in on a scheduled? I don't
Yeah,
know how
and
that's
to
going
your
to
point
play out.
there are real issues with the lagging. A lot of these testing, a lot of these centers that process these tests around the country are probably a little bit overwhelmed with the amount of the spike that's going on in this country right now. That's something that maybe St. Bonaventure will have to look at. Maybe they'll have to push that 14-day requirement back a little bit. I think that would maybe. I think 14 days is smart for now, but if there are concerns about some potential lag, some students not getting the results in time, I think that St. Bonaventure has to take into account that not every student's from New York. Obviously, some of these students who come from California, Florida, Texas, they might have trouble even getting a test.
Right. Well,
With
I've even heard of some students or people in our community in the New York area that have taken a test, supposed to get results in 5 days, takes a week. Some people just not getting results, the results just go missing. So there's a whole lot of issues that could arise out of this whole situation.
St. Bonaventure kind of has a little bit of an advantage in reopening because you have 2,000 students,
Yeah.
and requiring them to get a test is not terribly demanding because of the small amount of students we do have. But again, there could be a lot of issues with this testing, the lags. Will students be able to get a test in some of these states? In New York now, I think Governor Andrew Cuomo recently expanded testing to all New Yorkers. But in weeks prior, that wasn't the case. There are specific requirements for you to have to get a test. And I know a lot of these states that are seeing spikes, their resources might be limited. But what else stands out to you about this whole pre-arrival screening thing, Sean?
Well, another interesting aspect is when students are moving in, you won't be able to have your whole family like in the past. I know in the past when we were freshmen, Mike, we had family there, candlelight ceremony, a lot of non-socially distant activities. But yeah, the way this document breaks it down during move-in, students will only be allowed 2 family members to assist them during the move-in. So that'll be a
Another
change
thing
for
for
that as
me, and
well.
that's a great point there on the arrival, and it's such a big moment for these freshmen to be going to college, and it's a very emotional day. But that a lot of that, it's just it kind of feels like it doesn't matter anymore because of the worry and the concern and all of the stress that this school year is, and especially the fall semester, is going to have. But another thing that stood out to me on move-in day, and we're going to start moving the discussion a little bit towards the off-campus students here in a second, but all students, when they arrive, will receive almost like a bag full of personal protective equipment. I don't want to call it a gift bag, but you're getting a face mask. You're getting a couple of face masks, a 2-ounce bottle of hand sanitizer, and one thing that really stood out to me: a no-touch key to easily assist with opening some doors on campus. So I'll be interested to see how that works.
Right.
And then obviously, this is probably something that I can see being thrown in the trash by many St. Bonaventure students, which shouldn't be thrown in the trash, is instructions from New York State and CDC outlining best practices regarding social distancing and hand washing. And now, to my point, off-campus residents will be required to provide their address to Residence Life. That is something that probably has never happened in St. Bonaventure history. And now we scroll down a little bit more, and we see that these off-campus students might be under a little bit of pressure this year to behave. The Associate Dean for Campus Safety and Associate Dean for Student Life will serve as primary contacts for local law enforcement in responding to off-campus student behavior. So to me, Sean, it sounds like St. Bonaventure is very concerned with what's going to happen on these off-campus houses, the partying, the gathering. You don't know what's going to happen. Obviously, St. Bonaventure can't watch every move students make off campus, but it seems like they're making an effort to keep a close eye on it.
Yeah, they're making it certainly clear that they don't want PPE not being available to be an excuse for students to not use it. They are making face coverings easily accessible to all students, and they are requiring them to be worn in all the university buildings, public spaces, bathrooms, lobbies, hallways. And they are requiring the social distance too to be maintained in classrooms. Even if you are wearing a mask, which you will be required to wear in a classroom, you'll still even though you're socially distant, you'll be required to wear the mask as well.
And, it's just, I think a lot of the concern, at least from my discussions with professors, I haven't heard much concern at the university level with the administration, but some professors I spoke to are pretty concerned about what's happening in these residence halls when not as many eyes are on these students. What's happening off campus, especially when these kids are alone on the weekends, and we know how college is. Let's not be any stranger to this discussion here. The social aspect of college is huge. I mean, it's students do party. Students go out in the town. They go to these house parties. They go to the bars. They are going to interact in other activities
Right.
in the local community. That's a big concern, and a lot of that, Sean, isn't going to be acceptable this year by a lot of standards from many colleges and universities around the country.
And I think that brings up the enforcement of it. And in this document, it states that the residence hall capacity will be limited and a maximum of 2 students will be in a room. There won't be any triples or triples happening in any residence hall this year, and lounge spaces will also be eliminated.
St. Bonaventure in the past has had trouble with triples and doubles. I remember a couple of years ago there was a room in I think it was Laughlin Hall. They were putting kids in the lounge. A couple lounges throughout Laughlin Hall, and I think even Doyle Hall were created into triple rooms. I wonder if the university is having trouble finding places for all these kids to live this year.
This tells you just how seriously St. Bonaventure is taking this. It says these limits will be monitored and enforced via surveillance cameras throughout residence halls. So floor lounges, kitchens, they will be limited in the amount of students that can be in them, and it sounds like SBU will be enforcing that.
And that also, I mean, this whole topic is kind of bringing out a variety of different subtopics here. I wonder if St. Bonaventure is hiring any extra security officers to maybe monitor these cameras, because it does sound like they are maybe going to implement some more security cameras and measures on campus this year to monitor students. And another point too, and we'll get more into this later of what residence halls will look like exactly, but the cleaning crews. It sounds like cleaning is going to be happening almost every day, all hours of the day.
Right.
So now, most importantly here, what this kind of coincides with some faculty concerns as well, academic procedures. Sean, it sounds like from my past discussions and past information that we've heard from St. Bonaventure, there's going to be the class schedules are going to be a little bit spaced out. I think some students might have adjusted schedules in a few weeks when they can view those on mysbu.edu. But the hybrid classes, the classes being moved to different spaces throughout campus, the possibility of having online classes, there was just so much to unpack with the academic procedures. And now we have a look here. It looks like in the event that a student is unable to make class because they are ill with COVID-19, it looks like St. Bonaventure is going to, as you can see coming up on your screen here, a majority of our teaching spaces will be outfitted with cameras and other technology to make them, distance learning, readily available for students who can't make class because they're sick. Obviously, you have to wear a mask at all times, pretty much. And
it seems like they are making a lot of adjustments for faculty to allow them to say they have reasons to not want to be on campus. They will be able to, it seems like, to give lectures from home, but it doesn't seem like that leeway is being given to students as much. Students won't be able to just stay at home all semester.
Yeah, that's one thing that came to my mind today. What if, and I actually plan to do a live podcast with President Dr. Dennis DePiro coming up here in the next month or so before school starts. What if a student doesn't feel safe coming back to campus? I don't feel like that was made very clear in this document. And I feel like if you're going to, and I get the faculty members, probably more of them are in that at-risk community, but because we know so little about this virus, and you just have to assume that you don't know how it's going to affect you. You don't know. You can be young and healthy, but you hear these horror stories of all these younger adults getting infected with this virus, college-age students, and having trouble with it. I think it's pretty inevitable to assume that there has to be at least a population of students, a contingent of students who don't feel safe coming back to campus. Do you feel the same way on that?
Especially students that are coming from outside of the area. I think that would be a big concern for them and their families as well.
And that leads us into, and obviously there's so much to unpack with the academic stuff. And I think
And study abroad, that's no
a lot of
surprise right there.
a lot of things might be changed and added to this document in the coming weeks. But yeah, this one was to no surprise. I mean, all study abroad programs have been canceled for the fall 2020 semester. International students will be required, obviously, just as out-of-state students will on that quarantine list. They'll be required to meet any national or state requirements for quarantine and are testing prior to entering the St. Bonaventure University community once again this fall. And I guess I'm more so interested, because I'm not surprised at all at the study abroad programs were canceled for the fall, but what's going to happen for the spring? This summer, all the abroad programs were obviously canceled. So I'm interested to see if next spring, what the decision will be then. It just doesn't feel like you'll be able to control an outbreak in a residence hall. First of all, here I guess students who do become sick, and we'll look at those guidelines in a second here as we move through this document. It sounds like Doyle Hall is going to be the quarantine area, and they're going to be splitting up students. Maybe some will go home, some will stay in their room alone, some will be moved to Doyle Hall if there's room. But, man, I just don't feel like there's any way you can control an outbreak. Once an outbreak starts in one of these residence halls, I think that's just enough to say, okay, let's just move classes online. Do you kind of feel the same way there?
Yeah, I can tell you, Mike, I wouldn't want to be living in Doyle Hall this year.
So you got quite a bit of students living in one wing. Once one person gets it in one of these wings, I think it's game over.
Right.
And I think that's just enough reason, because these kids are all going out to these classes. They're taking classes or utilizing all these other buildings on campus. All these facilities, interacting with all these people. I think that's just enough to say, okay, let's pull the plug on this.
Well, because importantly, once you get COVID, it's not like you instantly know you have it. You could have it and be transmitting the virus to other people for a few days, or not even end up realizing you have it. And all these people all of a sudden have COVID, your professors, cafeteria workers, other staff members, and it's over at that point. There's nothing you can really do.
Absolutely. Another interesting point we haven't talked about yet is that I do believe you told me earlier, and I didn't catch this in the document while reading through it. I've only read it through once, but I will do it again. But you told me that if you don't live in a building, you won't be able to get in. Is that correct?
I do believe so. The wording's a little vague, but it does look like they won't be allowing you into a building unless you actually do live there.
And visitors won't be allowed in any of these residence halls this year from outside of the campus community. So you can kiss goodbye having your high school friends come visit you from Buffalo or Rochester this school year at least. I mean, that's always a big thing. You have a lot of people, and I believe we'll get to this eventually, but I think Parents Weekend is going to go by the wayside as well. But before we get into any of that, food service. Sean, this is another big one that students are probably going to be really interested in. It sounds like a lot of changes are coming to the RC Cafe, Francis Cafe, and the Hickey Dining Hall, most importantly. Yeah, and it sounds like St. Bonaventure is following Aramark's reopened playbook as they link that to their own here. It sounds like tables are going to be spaced out 6 feet apart. Unless you're at your table eating, a mask will be required as a student moves through the dining hall. I think if you can sit with 6 people at a table. I think it can't be any more than 6 people. I did read the Aramark playbook a little bit today, but wasn't too concerned about that, because I just think what St. Bonaventure's citing is more important than anything else here. But I think it also might be the RC Cafe is another one. That's a big hangout spot with students, for students and athletes. I think if the athletics department's worried about keeping the athletes safe, I don't know if you'll be able to maybe hang out in the RC Cafe this year. I know that's where I'd always hang out and maybe do some homework once in a while. That's a popular spot on campus, man, and I don't know if they're going to be having people in there this year either. Cafe Laverna.
Yeah, for all we know, it could be takeout only for all we know at this point.
And that wasn't the RC Cafe was not identified in this report, I believe. Now we're just going to move away from that here. We did skim over this a little bit, but now we're going to get to the what I was just talking about with family weekend. Extracurricular programs, events. This is a big one too. So it says here, we do not expect to host any large-scale events, performances, or concerts. So it sounds like they're hinting at graduation and family weekend there, Sean.
They're going to try to host some sort of events just to keep kids entertained, but I just don't really know how they're going to pull that off at this point.
And that graduation thing to me is just so that's one thing. The family weekends, just a completely different topic. That's whatever. You can cancel that, maybe move it to the spring. But that graduation ceremony, man, it's just so important for those seniors that graduated the class of 2020.
Right.
I did hear a rumor maybe that ceremony might be split up into 3 or 4 different ceremonies on that weekend. I think it's October 10th to the 13th that was supposed to be the graduation weekend. And interestingly enough, that was supposed to be October break for everyone else. Now, October break is not existent. And if the plan was to have, okay, we're going to have the graduation ceremony this weekend, and everyone else, pretty much everyone else is going to be off campus. All the other students are going to be gone. I just don't see how that graduation ceremony can take place anymore. Just so much up in the air with these events. So much up in the air with the Richter Center as well, and other extracurricular activities that make St. Bonaventure's campus so vibrant with activity. This is what the Richter Center's requirements look like. This is huge. Look at all these.
Very in-depth.
Almost a page and a half of lists, everything here from hand sanitizing to how many people can be on a basketball court. Only 3 people can be at a hoop on the basketball court at once. I think only 1 person can be on the racquetball court at once. Everything, all the equipment will be sanitized. The rock climbing wall will be closed.
How they're really doing anything they can at this point to keep the Richter Center open. I was honestly surprised when I saw that it would be open on here. I originally just assumed that it wouldn't make the cut, but they are doing it, but with a whole lot of restrictions.
And I think, this is like maybe just a tentative list of what the Richter Center safety protocols might be. I can think of maybe a few more they should have. But I think the Richter Center is going to be a test run. I think that if kids are utilizing that and not following the rules and not abiding by the protocols that St. Bonaventure and the leaders of the Richter Center have implemented, I think that they'll probably shut that down too if there's issues there. Don't you think?
Yeah, but another non-necessary thing, obviously all students love to use it, but if it comes between safety and working out in the Richter Center, they're going to cut the Richter Center right off.
And furthermore, it says group exercise room will be open. Users must bring their own mats and towels. Equipment in the lower fitness area will be spaced 6 feet apart. Only 15 people can occupy that room at once. Usually when I go into that room, and trust me, it's not that often, but that's always the most crowded part of the whole gym. You got people upstairs running on the treadmill. You got tons of people down there using those weights. I just think that I don't know. I don't like the idea that you got to have something for students to do and go to. But the Richter Center, I definitely think this is going to be a test run. If it's not effective, maybe they'll make changes, or maybe they'll just have to shut it down, and students will have to find other ways to get physical activity in. But I just think physical activity is so important, and it is. But again, it's just so risky to open up. You see all these news stories out there about these gyms in Florida, Arizona, other parts of the country. Maybe could be people starting outbreaks at these facilities. So yeah, the Richter Center, I'm going to keep an eye on that one. Go ahead. You were about to say something, Sean. Yeah,
and going down the document a little bit more, one of the last big things that really impact student is the whole travel section, if you go down a little bit more.
Yeah, we got club travel here, and it sounds like, and before we get to that, it sounds like club sports and rugby, that's still up in the air. I don't know if club sports will happen. I don't know if rugby will happen. Obviously, a lot of students are involved with that one. But we can move down to the – oh, actually, we missed something. We have to hit on this, Sean. The Bonabus late-night bus – the Bonabus and late-night bus operations. Most importantly, the Bonabus the late night bus is suspended. That's not happening this year. But the Bonnet bus, the one that takes you to Walmart and into Olean, I think you just got to have that one. I mean, a lot of students don't have a way to get there out into town, but that one is pending, depending on vendor availability. But it sounds like that one has a better chance of having late night service. Late night service is completely suspended.
Yeah, I don't know how much I want to get into the late night services, Mike, but I think the reasons are quite apparent why they wouldn't want to service
I
that one.
I would have to agree with that. Absolutely. There's something here in the bookstore. It sounds like the bookstore looks like that's kind of pending as well. Again, athletics, we haven't heard much on that end. Sounds like St. Bonaventure is just kind of waiting around for Atlantic 10 and NCAA guidance there. But now we have made it to the section that you want to talk about, and that is travel.
Right. Yeah, so it looks like St. Bonaventure, they're going to be restricting travel for students and employees as much as they possibly can. That includes travel for clubs and sports as well. Activities that require travel outside of Western New York aren't happening. Again, the language here is kind of vague, but it leads me to believe that if you do want to travel, say you want to do something on a weekend, it has to be within the Western New York area, so
Yep.
West of Rochester.
Absolutely. Sounds like they're definitely trying to limit that there for employees. And now you have the student travel, and they made it pretty clear that student travel will be completely limited. So this would probably coincide with the club sports and activity kind of thing. I know a lot of those groups travel on the weekends to different events. I think a lot of that's going to depend on these events either happening or not happening. But yeah, it does sound like St. Bonaventure. If the plan is to start in August and go straight through to Thanksgiving, that alone should probably tell you that they just don't want students to travel. One of the biggest reasons why they eliminated that fall break to begin with is they didn't want students to go home. Once everyone's there, they want everyone to stay there unless very urgent. I'm sure exceptions, didn't I read something in this document where you might have to document
Right. Yeah. It looks like if you're going anywhere outside of the Western New York region, so say you do go to the Buffalo area, I think that'll be okay. But if you're traveling outside of the Western New York region, you will be required to submit a form and fill that out. And as well, you could also receive a COVID test, possibly at the university's discretion if they want to make you take that or not.
And it sounds like just in general, the university would probably suggest stay on campus until Thanksgiving. Please. I think that's what they'd like, but that's probably not going to happen. And now they're with the apartments and townhouses, the garden apartments and townhouses, the ball is in the students' court here. It sounds like the students will have to, obviously toilet paper is provided to all residents. There you go. Wrote a story on that a few years ago. Residents are responsible for their own apartments, cleaning their own apartments, hand sanitizer, whatever, disinfecting the building. I think that's going to be cleaned daily. In the past, that's been a big issue with, I remember, last couple of years, you'd come by my apartment every once in a while and you'd always say, wow, it's pretty dirty in here. Those comments might not happen as much this year because it sounds like St. Bonaventure, maybe they hired more cleaning staff or whatever. And even if they didn't, it sounds like cleaning is just going to be a very big point of emphasis for everyone in every academic building. This academic building and residence building this year, as you see the academic building here, support buildings, protocols all pretty much look the same for everything. Same with the university offices. And now we're kind of getting into more of the nitty gritty stuff here, Sean, with
all the what ifs.
All the what ifs. What if there's an outbreak? How do we monitor this? How do we quarantine students? And so here we go. This is probably the most important part of the podcast here. So if you've already gotten bored, that's too bad because Sean and I are about to talk about some serious hypothetical stuff that probably will happen. I mean, I think going into this year, Sean, I think we all kind of have to have this in the back of our minds. I do believe that there's going to be some positive cases show up at some point. And what's going to happen is we're going to see how strong the university's contingency plans for this are. If they're not, if they crack, if a huge outbreak starts, if it spirals out of control, it's game over. What do you think?
This is probably one of the biggest parts of the plan. You can tell they put a lot of thought and effort into this. But again, Michael, my thoughts are that if COVID does starts to be seen on campus, I think it's game over at that point. I don't really know how much they can really do just because of how small the campus Bonaventure is and
Exactly.
how tight everything is. I don't think they're going to be able to get around that much.
And I talked to an infectious disease expert a few weeks ago for a story I was working on for my internship at SI.com, and he said even the best laid plans, and we were talking about football, we weren't even talking about school or anything in that regard, but even the best laid plans can go to dust. And I think this is where you could see this whole plan just blow up. And I hope that doesn't happen. No one hopes that happens. No one wants to see an outbreak on campus. And that's why it's so important for students, everyone, to be on board here and follow these protocols. I don't know, like you said, I just believe that if there's an outbreak, like you said, there's just not a whole lot you can do to probably contain it. First of all, to our points here, Sean, campus is so small. Everyone's so close together. The community's it's just so condensed. I just, once one person gets it, the roommate gets it. Who are these people in contact with at class or in the dining hall or in the library, or were they off campus on the weekend? Or, I mean, it's just so many what ifs here. And we're going to scroll down here and talk about containment, quarantine, isolation, all that good stuff. So yes, here we are for students, and maybe we should talk about the employees as well. We'll start with the students. Residential students, so students that are living on campus in these residence halls who test positive for COVID or require quarantine will be asked to return home unless they are unable to travel home by anything other than public transportation. They don't want these students riding public transportation. Obviously, you have COVID, you don't want to be exposing other people. In those cases, students will be placed in the designated quarantine isolation location at health services, so Doyle Hall, first floor. The Cattaraugus County Health Department, Department of Health, has consulted with the university if students will be returning home. So now we get into another interesting conversation. It sounds like if it happens on campus, there are possibilities. The student can go home. The student can quarantine in Doyle Hall or in their room or whatever. But once you get off campus here, this is where it gets interesting. If an off-campus commuter if an off-campus student / commuter student develops symptoms of COVID, they will notify health services through that health assessment, and they will call the Cattaraugus County Health Department at that number listed on the screen or right there to share that they have developed symptoms or they have tested positive. And it sounds like those students it'll be up to them to decide where they're going to quarantine, how they're going to quarantine. Maybe they can call the Cattaraugus County Health Department to assist with finding an appropriate place. It's just a lot to take in. It's a lot. It's just so much information at once. And they did actually lay out a few of the isolation, the isolation guidelines here. We can take a look at those. I'm just going to scroll down here. Students in isolation will be monitored by Cattaraugus County. So it sounds like if a student tests positive, the county health department, Cattaraugus County, they're going to be in close contact. St. Bonaventure is going to be in close contact. Another interesting point here, meals will be provided by the campus food service at no extra cost. So if you get sick with COVID, you'll be quarantined. You'll be getting meals. I believe they'll do something about laundry for you as well. It sounds like if you get sick on campus, you are going to be alone in your room for a long time until you're healthy again. And what I thought was interesting about that is usually when you test positive for COVID and you quarantine, you go into isolation, you have to test negative twice. I didn't see anything about that here in this document. And now we're on the quarantine off campus, or people who live in those apartments on the east side of campus. Obviously, this stating the obvious here, quarantine students will not be able to go to class. Roommates will have to split up within these houses or apartments. So yeah, it's just, to me, it's just students off campus. The ball's in their court to decide how to deal with this. And you'd have to think that these students live in these apartments on campus, in these houses and other living spaces off campus, are going to have some serious discussions with their roommate about this possibility here. And employees who test positive, kind of the same thing. I mean, it's all up to them to notify human resources, get that test, notify everyone they need to, quarantine. Contact tracing will obviously be put into place. Thorough contact tracing, as the Cattaraugus County Health Department likes to state all the time in their press releases. As you see some more employee guidelines there, I'll leave it on the screen for just a second. Again, it's just a lot to unpack, a lot of details, and sometimes when you really think about it, it kind of makes you feel uncomfortable about even going back at all. But this, to me, this communication part, Sean, this was probably the thing that stood out to me the most.
Yeah, no, I was looking for it. You were probably looking for it too, just to see what the university would have ready in place for if there is a COVID outbreak, how that's going to be announced and how people will learn of that.
Yeah, I think, and I'm always one, and I'm sure you are too, being journalist, transparency is huge. I think the campus, St. Bonaventure, they owe it to the campus community, if there's an outbreak, to just let everyone know. Let everyone know. Obviously, there's certain ways you can do that where you're not violating the HIPAA laws or anything. But I think there should be some sort of press release sent out. The Cattaraugus County Health Department does a pretty good job with it. They identified by gender and region this infected individuals live in. If they work at a healthcare facility or a nursing home, they also are kind of notified as well. They put that in the press release. But I think something that we could see with St. Bonaventure is maybe a male student or female student, same thing with faculty members. They can identify them by gender and then where they have been on campus or where they work or live on campus. I think that's something that could work. But it does sound like St. Bonaventure is going to make an effort to inform the campus community about potential exposure to the virus. And I'm sure there'll be some sort of contact tracing to go along with that, where people who have been into close contact with these individuals will get directly notified.
Then if we go down a little bit more, Mike, I think one of the biggest things in this entire document is, what could possibly cause the university to shut down during this fall semester?
Yeah, shutdown triggers, and there they are. Again, you'd be pretty naive not to think about this possibility. I mean, and this is one of the things that I was thinking about before even coming on the podcast here, Sean. What's changed since March, really? I know that New York has done extremely well with COVID. They have flattened that curve. In fact, they've demolished the curve. But all these other states, seemingly a growing list of states, almost 20, 25 states, probably more than that, haven't. In general, the United States is spiking. You have to just think about it for a second in this regard. What's changed? What makes you think, okay, well, New York's doing okay, but I just don't think that doesn't mean there's going to be an outbreak on campus. I think that it's just so dangerous. There's a lot of risk involved here. A rapid detection of an increase of COVID cases within the campus community. So again, an outbreak on campus, as we've already said a couple of times in this podcast, game over. Rapid detection of increase of COVID-19 symptoms within the community. So this isn't even confirmed cases. This is just, okay, if people are showing symptoms, it doesn't matter if you have COVID or not. It could be allergies. It could be a cold. If there's a lot of people showing symptoms of COVID, we might have to shut it down. Growing evidence of transmission risk from infected people. Increased community transmission in the immediate surrounding community. So Cattaraugus County right now, I think they have about 109 total cases. And actually in recent weeks, the last 2 weeks, I've noticed a little bit of a bump. Might have been because of 4th of July, or a lot of them are actually happening in a nursing home in Olean, I believe. So I don't know if you'll see a spike in Cattaraugus County. And I think if there is a spike, a big reason for it will be St. Bonaventure State. Right. I think that you have to think that way. Inability to isolate positive cases. So if it becomes too overwhelming, if there are too many people sick on campus, they can't isolate anyone. It's too much work. Kind of coincides with an outbreak. Yeah, that's game over again. Moving down here, health service triage reports, categorizing all patients presenting illness concern.
Yeah, another thing they list here is their daily data tracking indicators, which is what I imagine what they'll be looking at daily to help determine what they do moving forward. I'll be interested to see if they will share this information daily with the public as well to let them know what's happening on campus, what the numbers look like, and how things currently stand.
That could be something with the notice board, maybe every morning or sometime every day in the afternoon or evening. Could be an email. Okay, we had this happen today. How many people tested positive? Where these people were? Maybe that will be their way of communicating COVID cases on campus, to the campus community members. That was very interesting. And that kind of brings us to the end of this thorough document. And this is the task force work group here. A lot of people worked on this. A lot of people from the university, a lot of administrators, a lot of professors, some coaches, athletic administrators as well. Maybe some, I assume Dr. Watkins from Cattaraugus County, the health director, worked on this as well. But now that we're at the end of this whole analysis here, Sean, what are your final thoughts on this document?
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, it is a thorough document. There's a lot to it. It's 25 pages long. I think they hit all the important points on it. There are definitely some areas in this that are a little vague or ambiguous about like what could happen and what their plan is in certain situations and certain places on campus, what's going to happen there. But overall, I think it is a thorough document that does a good job of at least hitting the main points of what needs to be done and what will be done.
Yeah, to me, I think a lot of students have reached out to me to complain about it, which I felt was odd. I think St. Bonaventure did a nice job with it. I think it's what it needed to be. You need to be strict. You hear these health experts say it's better to be too strict than to be too lenient with a virus like this. I think that's St. Bonaventure, this document, I think it's exactly what it needed to be. Maybe there's some parts people will disagree with, but in the end, it's like a math equation, Sean. This whole thing, everything needs to go right. And students have asked me in the past, and I'm sure you've gotten the same questions too. Do you think that there's a chance that we might not go back, or do you think there's a chance we'll shut down? I think, yeah, those possibilities are real. And it's going to come down to students, faculty members, the whole campus community abiding by these rules strictly, religiously. If that doesn't happen, all it takes is one person. We've seen it
Right.
already with these COVID outbreaks across the country. People going out to bars, people going to parties, large gatherings. It's something, and I guess for the first time today, since coming home in March, I've been kind of on the down low. I haven't been doing much, but I have let my guard down a few times. And reading this document kind of reinforced to me, and I don't know how you felt, this is serious. This is life and death in a lot of cases. It's so serious. And I hope, my hope is just as a student, I guess it's acceptable for a student journalist to maybe express a little opinion here. I hope that everyone follows this. I'm concerned. I'm scared. And honestly, I'm a little bit scared to go back. I don't know how you feel, but we'll be there. We'll see how it goes in a few weeks.
We hope to be there.
We hope to be there, but that's all I have on this one. Sean, you can wrap it up for us.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of planning that's gone into this, but it'll just come down to the students. If they want to have a good semester, a healthy semester, and one that they're on campus for, it's going to be completely on their shoulders how the semester turns out. SBU has the plans in place if things start to go wrong, but it's going to fall right on the students' shoulders.
Absolutely. Thanks for tuning in to another edition of a unique edition of Tap Into Greater Olean podcast. Mike Hogan, Sean Mickey breaking down the Phase 4 thorough, comprehensive 25-page reopening plan for St. Bonaventure. As always, stay tuned for more updates. Thanks for joining, guys.